President Biden pledges to combat privilege in the college admissions process as new text messages come out revealing that he used his connections to get his granddaughter into the University of Pennsylvania. The Michigan House passes a bill that, if passed by the Michigan Senate, would making using the wrong pronouns a felony. And supporters of Brazil's President Lula bar opposition leader Jair Bolsonaro from running for president until 2030. This is the news that you need to know for today, Wednesday, July 5th, 2023. I hope that you all had a wonderful 4th of July. Just a reminder to hit the subscribe button down below so that you can stay notified every time I post a news video like this or a timeless episode. Unshockingly, of course, new information is coming out thanks to the Hunter Biden laptop story. Leaked emails prove that President Biden used his connections with the president of the University of Pennsylvania, Amy Gutmann, in order to get his granddaughter, who was not a particularly great student, Maisie Biden, into the prestigious university. This comes after the Supreme Court just overturned affirmative action, or race-based preferences, in college admissions last week. This has sparked a new civil rights battle over college admissions in general. A new lawsuit is being filed against Harvard. It's actually filed by the Lawyers for Civil Rights group on behalf of 3 minority advocacy groups. One is called the Chica Project, the other the African Community of Economic Development of New England, and the third, the Greater Boston Latino Network. And they are accusing Harvard of discrimination by giving preferential treatment to the wealthy and also to legacy students. Now, this lawsuit is saying that this preferential treatment overwhelmingly benefits white students, and actually around 15% of admitted students are allegedly these white students who are either A, very wealthy, or B, legacies and benefit from that status. So President Biden, in the wake of this new lawsuit filed against Harvard, voiced his support for those who are suing. And he has called for an end to the practice of legacy admissions, stating that it perpetuates privilege rather than promoting equal opportunity. Let's listen to a clip where President Biden said this.
Practice like legacy admissions and other systems expand privilege instead of opportunity.
The same day that President Biden virtue signals and panders to us about the existence of privilege in college admissions, we find out, thanks to leaked text messages and emails going back to Hunter Biden's laptop, that he and his son Hunter helped their daughter, or President Biden's granddaughter, Maisie Biden, get into the University of Pennsylvania using connections that then Vice President Biden had. Okay, so let's look at some of these text messages that have been revealed. Going back to October 31st, 2018, this is the day before early applications are due for Ivy League universities. The deadline for early application is November 1st. So it looks like Maisie Biden was cutting it a little close, applying early to UPenn. She texted her father, Hunter Biden, on October 31st, "I applied early decision to Penn today." Just 2 days later, Maisie asked her father if there was, quote, an update on her application. Seems like Miss Maisie was getting a little impatient. Just had to wait 48 hours to see if her daddy and her granddaddy kicked it upstairs to the administration at University of Pennsylvania. Then, about a month and a half later, the day that early decisions came out for the University of Pennsylvania, then Vice President Joe Biden texted his son Hunter that he was, quote, going to try to see University of Pennsylvania President Gutmann tomorrow. 2 days later, according to these texts, Joe Biden told Hunter Biden that he, quote, had a great talk with Gutmann. Maisie is still in the game for regular acceptance, but she must do well in class this period. It's real. We should talk about tutors, etc., starting tomorrow. Then, 2 days later, on December 15th, 2018, Maisie writes to her father saying, I hear back from Penn at 7 p.m. I love you. Then Hunter Biden writes back, looks like Pop has gotten some very good news. Did you talk to him? Maisie writes back, he called me on Friday, but not since then. What is it? Then Hunter writes, you are in the regular pool of applicants and your app will be reviewed along with your grades this year. I also think it would help if your lacrosse coach had a talk with their lacrosse coach if you had any interest in playing sports there. Bottom line is that Gutman, this is the president of UPenn, made it clear that in order for you to explain 11th grade, you have to show improvement in 12th, which is something I think we would all have liked to know from the start. But in fairness, we were much later in the application process than usual and made it look like we weren't 100% about Penn. Oh my gosh. Shall I continue? Do you have a barf bag at home? If not, get one. This is on March 7th, 2019. So this is just about 2 weeks before regular decisions for UPenn come out. These are text messages between Hunter Biden and his father, Joe. Joe Biden wrote to Hunter, spoke with the Dean of Admissions at Penn yesterday. Results are posted on Thursday, the 29th. She didn't tell me, but she said I'd probably hear from President Gutman before. May be wrong, but I took that as encouragement. If I hear before 1 p.m. on the 29th, I'll call you immediately so that you can call Maisie. Let me know if there's anything I can do on anything. Well, it worked because Maisie Biden was admitted to the University of Pennsylvania, regular acceptance in March of 2019. University of Pennsylvania has a 5.9% admissions rate, but when you are the granddaughter of a vice president who is pushing at every turn to try to get you in, using all of his connections, well, doesn't matter if you're a bad student. Doesn't matter if you had horrible grades in the 11th grade. If you get your tutors because the president told your granddad to do so, you can get in regular round. President Gutman and Joe Biden have had a long relationship even before 2019. Gutman in 2013 awarded Vice President Biden with an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from the University of Pennsylvania and called him, quote, one of the nation's most foremost statesmen. Then, 3 years later in 2016, Joe and Hunter Biden had many meetings with President Gutman. These are according to the emails from the Hunter Biden laptop. By the way, can we give the guy in Delaware who took possession of Hunter's laptop, can we please give him a Nobel Peace Prize or a Presidential Medal of Freedom? This guy has done such a solid for all of us. We wouldn't have known about any of this. Of course, we would have speculated, and the Bidens seem to be so clumsy with laying around documents and cocaine and God knows what, we probably would have figured all of this out. But this guy in Delaware who put all of the emails on a hard drive and handed it over to Rudy Giuliani and the FBI, I'm telling you, we should all give to a GoFundMe to support this guy because he has done so much for our nation. So again, these are according to the emails. President Gutman and Joe and Hunter met in 2016 several times, actually among other places, at Joe Biden's Delaware Beach house. And then a year later, in 2017, the University of Pennsylvania launched the infamous Penn Biden Center, which was an incredibly lucrative venture for both the Bidens and University of Pennsylvania. UPenn raked in over $1 billion in foreign funding after launching the think tank in 2017. Guess principally from where? Kazakhstan, Portugal, Spain, England? No, China. China is giving most of this $1 billion to UPenn. The university paid Joe Biden nearly $1 million, $900,000, from 2017 through April of 2019 for his involvement at this think tank. Again, money from China. Even though President Biden taught no regular classes at University of Pennsylvania and just attended around a dozen ticketed events at the university. And then, of course, in July of 2021, President Joe Biden nominated President Gutman of UPenn to serve as his ambassador to Germany. She was confirmed in a 54-42 vote by the Senate in January of 2022. This exemplifies the Democratic Party mantra, rules for thee, not for me. We will defund the police in your neighborhoods, but not in ours. We will enforce radical racial and gender theory on your kids in public schools, but we will send our kids to private schools where they will get a great education. And then, of course, President Biden is saying that we have to uproot privilege in admissions. We have to get rid of wealthy families, legacy families, peddling their influence to get their children in. And then we see here, he's doing the same thing. President Biden would never advocate for these rules, in this case, getting rid of legacy admissions, for instance, if he knew he couldn't insulate himself from the consequences. That is the problem with our country at the moment. We have an elite managerial class that has all of the influence, gets to determine the way other people live, what laws get passed, and they can insulate themselves from whatever they force upon other people. Moving on to the second very encouraging news story of the day, the Michigan House of Representatives has passed a bill that would make it wrong to use improper pronouns, and by making it wrong, I mean making it a felony and possibly a $10,000 fine. So this was passed this week by the House of Representatives for the state. It's Bill HB 4474. And according to the bill, I'm reading directly from it here, it is a felony to, quote, intimidate someone by intentionally using incorrect gender pronouns. Offenders could face up to 5 years in prison or a fine of $10,000. So what is intimidation, you may ask? The bill defines it as, quote, a willful course of conduct involving repeated harassment that causes a reasonable person, that's the best part, a reasonable person, to feel terrorized or threatened. And it specifically protects sexual orientation and gender identity or expression as a protected class. Now, again, this was passed by the House of Representatives in Michigan. It has to be kicked over to the state Senate. And if it passes by a majority vote, then it will get kicked up to the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who is expected to sign it into law. There will probably be an injunction that will be passed to stay this law if it is indeed passed into law, and hopefully the Supreme Court will overturn it. But still, the fact that we are even at a place in the United States where a state House of Representatives could even pass such a statute, it tells us a great deal about the health or lack of health of our nation. Now, moving on to our third story in international news, Brazil has officially banned the former president, the conservative Jair Bolsonaro, who is also the main opposition leader to the current president, President Lula. They have banned him from holding office, even running for office, until the year 2030. Okay? This was passed by the Electoral Court of Brazil. They found Jair Bolsonaro guilty of an abuse of power and undermining the confidence in the voting system. This came after a presidential election in October of 2022, which many citizens of Brazil said was rigged. It was against the then current president, Jair Bolsonaro, and a former president, the head of the Workers' Party, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. And Lula won the election by the closest margin in all of Brazil's history. Many people, including Bolsonaro himself, said that there was heavy interference in the election from pro-Lula members of the government, that they suppressed free speech, sound familiar, of people who opposed President Lula, and that they even went as so far to throw opponents of Lula in jail, okay? One of the Supreme Court members, Justice Alexandre de Moraes, was the head of the Electoral Tribunal, which oversees election proceedings for the country of Brazil. Interesting that a Supreme Court justice is on this Electoral Tribunal, but nevertheless, he is. He passed a resolution, this is back in October, which would criminalize, quote, misinformation and fake news during the election. And he used this as a weapon against those who did not support Lula. For instance, when a Brazilian citizen in a privately encrypted WhatsApp chat group quipped in a leaked conversation that he would have preferred a military dictatorship over the return of Lula, Justice de Moraes signed a search warrant, and he sent the police to raid this individual's home. The authorities also froze this individual's bank accounts, subpoenaed their financial, phone, and digital records, and told social media networks to suspend some of their accounts. Now, this was one of many other citizens who were intimidated and criminalized for expressing opposition to Lula. In January 8th of this year, Supporters of Bolsonaro stormed federal buildings all throughout Brazil, including Congress, the Supreme Court, and the presidential palace. Many in the United States likened that day to Brazil's January 6th, as supporters of Bolsonaro were saying that the election was stolen. And so now, since then, President Bolsonaro has been held on obstruction of justice and interfering in an election. And here we see that they have just levied this punishment that won't even allow him to run for office for another 7 years. Now, people in Brazil are saying that this hugely undermines faith and confidence in the government system by criminalizing the main opposition leader. Lula, the president, is also not so clean himself. In 2007, he and his Workers' Party orchestrated the biggest bribery scandal in the Western Hemisphere. He and his supporters worked with businesses and gave them padded contracts and kickbacks, and many of these people actually went to jail, including President Lula, until he was vacated by the Supreme Court in 2021 on a technicality, allowing him to run for office and win, as he did in 2022. But meanwhile, Mr. Bolsonaro, for challenging the results of the election, was fined by more than $4 million and now has to sit out from office permanently. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope that this was informative. Be sure to hit the subscribe button down below if you'd like to see more news, and take care.